Marcus Williams walked through the military base with his shoulders straight and his head held high, but he could feel the eyes on him. The other soldiers whispered behind his back, their voices carrying just enough for him to hear the cruel words. They called him names, questioned his toughness, and made jokes about the way he looked different from them. The 23-year-old soldier had joined the army 6 months ago, hoping to prove himself and serve his country with honor. He came from a small town where everyone knew everyone, and being different had always been hard. His dark skin made him stand out in his mostly white hometown, and now, even in the military where he thought things would be different, he faced the same problems. Every morning during training, Marcus pushed himself harder than anyone else. While others complained about the long runs, he finished first. When they struggled with heavy equipment, he lifted more than his share. He wanted to show them that he belonged here, that he was just as good as any of them. But no matter how hard he tried, the whispers and laughs continued. The worst part was during mess hall meals. Marcus would sit alone at a corner table, eating his food quickly while listening to the other soldiers joke and laugh together. Sometimes they would look in his direction and burst into laughter, making it clear they were talking about him. He pretended not to notice, but inside, his heart ached with loneliness and frustration. His bunkmates were the worst. They would wait until lights out, then whisper cruel jokes about him in the darkness. They talked about his appearance, made up stories about his background, and questioned whether he had what it took to be a real soldier. Marcus lay in his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he had made a mistake by joining the military. One particular evening, after a grueling day of combat training, Marcus returned to the barracks exhausted and covered in mud. The other soldiers were already there, cleaning their weapons and talking loudly about their performance during the exercises. As Marcus walked to his bunk, he heard one of them say something that made the others laugh loudly. "Look at him," whispered Private Johnson, not caring if Marcus could hear. "Walking around like he owns the place, but we all know he doesn't belong here with real soldiers." Another soldier joined in. "Yeah, probably got in through some special program. Bet he's never seen real action in his life." Marcus felt his fists clench at his sides, but he had learned to control his anger. Fighting back would only make things worse and could get him kicked out of the army. He had worked too hard to get here to throw it all away because of their ignorance and cruelty. Instead, he quietly gathered his toiletries and headed to the showers. The hot water felt good against his tired muscles, washing away the dirt and sweat from the day's training. As he stood under the spray, Marcus thought about his grandmother back home. She had raised him after his parents died in a car accident. When he was 8 years old, his grandmother always told him to be proud of who he was and where he came from. She taught him that real strength came from inside, not from what others thought about you. "One day," she used to say, "people will see the real you, Marcus, and when they do, they'll understand what I've always known, that you're special." Marcus touched the spot on his back where his most precious memory lived. Hidden beneath his uniform was something that told his real story, something that connected him to his past and gave him strength for the future. It was something none of these soldiers knew about, something that would change everything if they ever found out. But for now, it remained his secret, covered by fabric and hidden from the world that seemed determined to judge him without knowing the truth about who he really was. The harassment got worse as weeks passed. During physical training, when Marcus outperformed everyone else in push-ups and running drills, the other soldiers found new ways to put him down. They said he was trying too hard, showing off, or that the instructors were going easy on him. Nothing he did seemed to earn their respect. Private Johnson had become the unofficial leader of the group that targeted Marcus. He was a tall, loud man from Texas who thought being in the military gave him the right to decide who belonged and who didn't. Johnson had been in the Army for 2 years and used his experience to influence the newer recruits against Marcus. "You see how he always keeps his shirt on?" Johnson said one hot afternoon when several soldiers were changing clothes after a particularly sweaty training session. "Even when it's burning hot outside, he never takes it off. What's he hiding under there?" The question sparked curiosity among the others. Most soldiers were comfortable changing clothes around each other, but Marcus always found privacy when he needed to change. He would use a bathroom stall, or wait until the barracks were empty. This behavior, which he thought went unnoticed, had actually been observed by several soldiers. "Maybe he's got some embarrassing scars," suggested another soldier. "Or maybe he's just shy because he's not as tough as he pretends to be." The speculation continued for days, with the group making up increasingly wild stories about what Marcus might be hiding. Some thought he had tattoos he was ashamed of. Others believed he had physical deformities. The truth was that Marcus was protecting something precious, something that meant more to him than these soldiers could ever understand. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to excel in all his military duties. His marksmanship scores were among the highest in the company. His knowledge of military procedures impressed even the toughest instructors. During field exercises, he showed leadership qualities that made his superiors take notice. But none of this mattered to his fellow soldiers, who had already decided he didn't belong. The breaking point came during a particularly hot training day when the company was practicing combat maneuvers in full gear. The temperature was over 90 degrees, and soldiers were dropping from heat exhaustion. The drill sergeant had given permission for everyone to remove their shirts to prevent overheating. One by one, the soldiers stripped down to their undershirts or went completely shirtless. Marcus, however, kept his uniform shirt buttoned up despite the sweat pouring down his face and the obvious discomfort he was feeling. His face was red from the heat, and he was breathing heavily, but he refused to remove his shirt. "Williams," shouted Johnson from across the training ground, "take off that shirt before you pass out. What are you trying to prove?" Marcus shook his head and continued with the exercise, but his performance was suffering. The heat was making him dizzy, and his movements were becoming slower and less precise. Other soldiers started gathering around, curious about why he was being so stubborn about something so simple. "Come on, man," said Private Rodriguez, one of the few soldiers who hadn't joined in the harassment. "It's just a shirt. Nobody cares what you look like underneath." But Marcus knew they were wrong. He cared, and he had good reason to care. What was on his back wasn't just a tattoo or a scar. It was his history, his family, his deepest connection to the people who had shaped him into the man he was today. It was something he had never shown to anyone, something he planned to keep private until he could find people who would understand and respect its meaning. The drill sergeant noticed the commotion and walked over to see what was happening. Sergeant Thompson was a fair man who had been watching Marcus's performance with interest. He had noticed the young soldier's dedication and skill, and he didn't appreciate the way some of the other soldiers treated him. "What's the problem here?" Thompson asked, looking around at the gathered soldiers. "Williams won't take off his shirt, Sergeant," Johnson said with a smirk. "Says he's fine, but look at him. He's about to drop from the heat." Sergeant Thompson studied Marcus carefully. The young soldier was indeed suffering from the heat, but there was determination in his eyes that the sergeant respected. Thompson had seen many soldiers come and go, and he had learned to recognize the ones who had real character, even when others couldn't see it. Sergeant Thompson made a decision that would change everything. Instead of ordering Marcus to remove his shirt in front of everyone, he pulled the young soldier aside for a private conversation. The other soldiers watched with curiosity as the two men walked toward the equipment shed, away from prying eyes and listening ears. "Son," Thompson said quietly, "I can see you're struggling with something. You're one of the best soldiers I've trained in years, but you're going to hurt yourself if you don't cool down. What's going on?" Marcus looked into the sergeant's eyes and saw something he hadn't seen from anyone else on the base: genuine concern and respect. Thompson wasn't asking to embarrass him or to satisfy curiosity. He was asking because he cared about Marcus as a soldier and as a person. "Sergeant, I have something on my back that's very personal to me," Marcus said carefully. "It's not something I'm ashamed of, but it's something I don't want to share with people who wouldn't understand its meaning." Thompson nodded slowly. He had been in the military for 15 years and had met soldiers from all walks of life. He understood that everyone carried their own stories, their own connections to home and family. He also understood that some things were too precious to be exposed to ridicule or misunderstanding. "I respect that, Williams," Thompson said, "but I also can't let you collapse from heat stroke. How about this? You take off that shirt here, where it's just you and me. Cool down for a few minutes, and then we'll figure out what to do about the rest of the training." Marcus hesitated for a moment, then slowly began unbuttoning his shirt. As the fabric fell away, Sergeant Thompson saw what Marcus had been protecting so carefully. Covering most of his back was an elaborate, beautiful tattoo that told a story Thompson had never expected to see. The tattoo was a detailed portrait of an elderly African-American woman wearing military dress blues from the Vietnam War era. Her face was kind but strong, with eyes that seemed to hold years of wisdom and experience. Around the portrait were military medals, ribbons, and insignia that Thompson recognized immediately. Below the woman's image, in elegant script, were the words, "Sergeant Major Dorothy Williams, my hero, my grandmother." Thompson stared at the tattoo in amazement. The artwork was incredible, but more than that, the meaning behind it was something that demanded respect. This wasn't just a tattoo. It was a tribute, a memorial, a declaration of love and honor for someone who had clearly been the most important person in Marcus's life. "Your grandmother was a sergeant major?" Thompson asked quietly, his voice filled with new respect. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion. "She served 3 tours in Vietnam as a combat medic. She saved dozens of lives and earned a Bronze Star, 2 Purple Hearts, and a Distinguished Service Cross. She was the first African-American woman to reach the rank of sergeant major in her unit." Thompson felt a chill run down his spine as he recognized the significance of what he was seeing. The Distinguished Service Cross was one of the highest honors a soldier could receive, awarded only for extraordinary heroism in combat. This young man, who had been treated so poorly by his fellow soldiers, was the grandson of a genuine war hero. "She raised me after my parents died," Marcus continued. "Everything I know about honor, duty, and serving others, I learned from her. She taught me that being a soldier means protecting people who can't protect themselves no matter what they think of you." The sergeant understood now why Marcus had been so protective of his secret. This tattoo wasn't just body art. It was a sacred connection to a family legacy of military service and heroism. It represented values and sacrifices that most people, especially the soldiers who had been tormenting Marcus, wouldn't understand or appreciate. "She told me that real soldiers are measured by their actions, not by what others think of them," Marcus said, putting his shirt back on. "She said that someday when it mattered most, people would see who I really am." Thompson watched as Marcus buttoned up his shirt, covering the magnificent tribute to his grandmother once again. The sergeant felt ashamed that he had allowed the harassment to continue for so long without intervening more forcefully. He had failed to see what was right in front of him, that Marcus Williams wasn't just a good soldier, he was part of a family tradition of military excellence. "Williams," Thompson said firmly, "I think it's time some people around here learned a few things about respect and military history. Are you ready to show them who you really are?" The moment Marcus had been both dreading and hoping for finally arrived 3 days later. Word had spread through the base that Commander Colonel James Mitchell was coming for his monthly inspection and evaluation of the troops. Colonel Mitchell was a legend in the military, a decorated veteran of multiple conflicts who had earned respect throughout the entire armed forces. What the soldiers didn't know was that Sergeant Thompson had requested a private meeting with the colonel before the inspection. Thompson had served under Mitchell years earlier, and knew he was a man who valued character and family military tradition above all else. The sergeant felt it was time to set the record straight about Marcus Williams. The morning of the inspection, the entire company lined up in perfect formation on the parade ground. Colonel Mitchell walked slowly down the line, examining each soldier with the sharp eye of someone who had seen combat and knew what real soldiers looked like. He was a tall, imposing man with gray hair and scars on his hands that told stories of his own service. Marcus stood at attention with the others, his heart pounding as the colonel approached his position. He could feel the familiar stares and hear the quiet snickers from some of the other soldiers. They were probably hoping the colonel would notice something wrong with him, something that would confirm their belief that he didn't belong. But when Colonel Mitchell stopped in front of Marcus, something unexpected happened. The colonel looked directly into the young soldier's eyes for a long moment, then nodded with what appeared to be approval. The other soldiers noticed this interaction and wondered what it meant. After the inspection, Colonel Mitchell addressed the entire company. His voice carried the authority of someone who had led men into battle and brought them home safely. "Soldiers," he began, "I've been watching you train, and I've been hearing reports about your unit. I'm here today because Sergeant Thompson has brought something to my attention that I believe you all need to understand." The soldiers stood perfectly still, wondering what was coming next. Private Johnson and his followers exchanged worried glances, hoping they weren't in trouble for something. Military service is about more than following orders and completing training. Mitchell continued. It's about understanding the traditions and sacrifices that came before us. It's about respecting the legacy of those who served with honor and recognizing that legacy in the soldiers who serve beside us today. Marcus felt his stomach tighten, sensing that somehow this speech was connected to him. Sergeant Thompson had positioned himself where Marcus could see him, and the sergeant gave him an encouraging nod. "Private Williams," Colonel Mitchell called, out suddenly. "Step forward." The command echoed across the parade ground like a gunshot. Marcus felt every eye on him as he took 3 steps forward and stood at attention in front of the colonel. Behind him, he could hear whispers and shuffling feet as the other soldiers wondered what was happening. "Private Williams, Sergeant Thompson, has informed me that you have something on your person that tells an important story about military service. Something that every soldier in this company should see and understand. Do I have your permission to share that story?" Marcus's heart was racing, but he looked into Colonel Mitchell's eyes and saw the same respect and understanding he had seen in Sergeant Thompson's face. This was his moment, the moment his grandmother had told him would come, when people would finally see who he really was. "Yes, sir," Marcus said clearly, his voice carrying across the silent parade ground. Colonel Mitchell nodded and gestured for Marcus to turn around and remove his shirt. The entire company watched in stunned silence as Marcus slowly unbuttoned his uniform shirt and let it fall to the ground. When he turned his back to face the assembled soldiers, gasps and murmurs rippled through the formation. There, in stunning detail and vibrant colors, was the image of Sergeant Major Dorothy Williams in her dress blues, surrounded by her military decorations and honors. The tattoo was a masterpiece of artistry, but more than that, it was a declaration of love, respect, and family pride that took everyone's breath away. Colonel Mitchell stepped closer to examine the tattoo, and his expression changed to one of amazement and deep respect. He recognized every medal and ribbon depicted in the artwork, and he understood immediately what he was looking at. "Soldiers," the colonel announced, his voice carrying a new intensity. "You are looking at a tribute to Sergeant Major Dorothy Williams, United States Army, a hero of the Vietnam War and one of the most decorated female soldiers of her generation." The silence on the parade ground was complete now. Even Private Johnson and his followers stood with their mouths open, finally, understanding that they had been completely wrong about Marcus Williams. Colonel Mitchell's voice grew stronger as he continued to address the stunned soldiers. Sergeant Major Dorothy Williams served 3 combat tours in Vietnam as a field medic. She pulled wounded soldiers from burning helicopters under enemy fire. She performed battlefield surgery in conditions that would break most people. She saved the lives of over 60 American soldiers during her service. The colonel paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. She was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for single-handedly defending a field hospital against enemy attack while treating wounded soldiers. She was wounded twice herself, but refused evacuation until all her patients were safe. Marcus stood with his back to the company, feeling exposed but also proud. For the first time since joining the military, he felt like people were truly seeing him. Not just his appearance or their assumptions about him, but his real identity and the legacy he carried. "Private Williams," Colonel Mitchell said, turning to address Marcus directly. "Your grandmother broke barriers and set standards that soldiers still aspire to today. She proved that courage has no gender, no color, and no limits except those we place on ourselves." The colonel then faced the company again, his expression serious and commanding. "This young man has been carrying the weight of that legacy every day since he arrived here. He has been honoring his grandmother's memory through his own exceptional performance and dedication. And how have some of you responded to that dedication? The silence was deafening. Several soldiers, including Private Johnson, shifted uncomfortably as they realized the colonel was addressing their behavior directly. They had never expected their casual cruelty to be exposed in front of the highest-ranking officer on the base. I've been hearing reports about harassment, about soldiers who think they can judge a man's worth based on anything other than his character and performance. Mitchell continued, his voice growing colder. Let me make something very clear. That behavior stops today. Marcus put his shirt back on and turned to face his fellow soldiers. Many of them couldn't meet his eyes, shame written clearly on their faces. Others looked at him with new respect and understanding, realizing they had completely misjudged him. Private Rodriguez, who had occasionally tried to defend Marcus, stepped forward slightly. Sir, I want to say that Private Williams has always been professional and dedicated. Some of us should have done more to support him. Colonel Mitchell nodded approvingly at Rodriguez. Recognition of mistakes is the first step toward being a better soldier and a better person. The military is built on the principle that we stand together, that we support each other regardless of our backgrounds or differences. Then the colonel did something that surprised everyone. He walked over to Marcus and extended his hand for a handshake. Not the usual military salute, but a gesture of personal respect between equals. Private Williams, I had the honor of serving alongside your grandmother during my early years in the service. She was my sergeant when I was just a scared young lieutenant, and she taught me what real leadership looked like. I can see her strength and values in you. Marcus's eyes filled with tears as he shook the colonel's hand. You knew her, sir? I did indeed. She was one of the finest soldiers I ever served with, and she talked about her grandson constantly. She was so proud that you were planning to follow in her footsteps. Mitchell smiled warmly. She would be proud to see the soldier you've become, despite the challenges you've faced here. The revelation that Colonel Mitchell had actually served with Marcus's grandmother sent another wave of shock through the assembled soldiers. This wasn't just a story about some unknown hero. This was about someone the colonel himself had known and respected. Sergeant Thompson, Colonel Mitchell called out, I want you to make sure that Private Williams receives the recognition and respect he has earned. His performance scores are among the highest in this company, and his leadership potential is clear to anyone who bothers to look. Thompson snapped to attention. Yes, sir. It will be my pleasure to ensure Private Williams is treated with the respect he deserves. As the formal inspection concluded, something fundamental had changed in the atmosphere of the base. The soldiers who had spent months making Marcus's life miserable now saw him in a completely different light. They realized they had been tormenting someone whose family had sacrificed more for their country than they could ever imagine. The changes that followed were immediate and profound. Within hours of Colonel Mitchell's revelation, the entire atmosphere of the military base had transformed. Soldiers who had previously avoided Marcus or treated him with hostility now approached him with respect and genuine interest in getting to know him better. Private Johnson, who had led much of the harassment, was among the first to approach Marcus privately. With his head down and his voice quiet with shame, he apologized sincerely for his behavior. I was wrong about you, Williams. Completely wrong. I let my own ignorance and prejudice blind me to who you really are. Your grandmother sounds like an amazing woman, and you're clearly following in her footsteps. Marcus accepted the apology, with the grace his grandmother had taught him. We all make mistakes, Johnson. What matters is what we do moving forward. Over the following weeks, Marcus found himself becoming a natural leader among his fellow soldiers. His knowledge of military history, combined with his exceptional performance in all areas of training, earned him respect that went far beyond what Colonel Mitchell had revealed about his family background. Sergeant Thompson began giving Marcus additional responsibilities and leadership opportunities. During training exercises, other soldiers started looking to him for guidance and inspiration. His calm demeanor under pressure and his willingness to help struggling soldiers made him invaluable to the unit. The most meaningful change came when Marcus started sharing stories about his grandmother with soldiers who were interested in learning about military history and tradition. He told them about the lessons she had taught him about service, sacrifice, and treating others with dignity regardless of their background. She always said that the military is strongest when it brings together people from all walks of life. Marcus explained to a group of soldiers gathered in the recreation room one evening. She believed that diversity of experience and background makes us better fighters and better protectors of freedom. These conversations helped bridge gaps between soldiers who had never understood each other before. Marcus's story became a catalyst for broader discussions about respect, inclusion, and the true meaning of military service. 6 months after the inspection that changed everything, Marcus was promoted to corporal ahead of many soldiers who had been in the service longer. His leadership skills and dedication had impressed not just his immediate superiors, but officers throughout the base who had heard about his exceptional performance. During the promotion ceremony, Colonel Mitchell returned to personally pin the new rank insignia on Marcus's uniform. "Your grandmother would be incredibly proud," he said quietly as he adjusted the corporal stripes. "She always knew you would make an outstanding soldier." Marcus had kept in touch with Colonel Mitchell, who had shared more stories about serving with Sergeant Major Dorothy Williams. These conversations helped Marcus feel even more connected to his grandmother's legacy and gave him new insights into the values that had shaped both of them. The tattoo that had once been a source of secrecy and vulnerability had become a symbol of pride and inspiration for the entire unit. Soldiers would sometimes ask Marcus to tell them about specific medals or ribbons depicted in the artwork, turning each conversation into a lesson about military history and the sacrifices made by previous generations. Private Rodriguez, who had always tried to be fair to Marcus, became one of his closest friends and allies. "You know what I learned from all this?" Rodriguez said one day as they cleaned their weapons together. "I learned that you never really know someone until you take the time to understand their story." As Marcus looked around at his fellow soldiers, men and women who now treated him with genuine respect and friendship, he remembered his grandmother's words about people eventually seeing who he really was. She had been right, as she so often was. The young man who had once eaten alone in the mess hall now found himself surrounded by soldiers eager to hear his thoughts and learn from his experience. The barracks that had once been filled with cruel whispers now echoed with laughter and camaraderie that included everyone. Marcus Williams had proven that real strength comes not from fighting back against ignorance and hatred, but from maintaining your dignity and values until others have the chance to see your true character. His grandmother's legacy lived on not just in the beautiful tattoo on his back, but in the way he chose to honor her memory through his own service and leadership. The soldier who had been laughed at and ridiculed had become exactly what Sergeant Major Dorothy Williams had always known he could be: a leader, a teacher, and a bridge between different worlds, carrying forward the best traditions of military service into a new generation.